About the same amount of uranium as this Rubik's Cube can power all of the energy that you need in your entire life. Had Germany spent $580 billion on nuclear instead of renewables, it would already be getting 100% of its electricity from clean energy sources and all of its transportation energy.
How about some of that sanity?
Electronic vehicles are a disaster for the energy grid, a disaster for the environment, and a disaster for your personal autonomy.
We need to move forward with nuclear. And one of the things that I believe is that we have a great opportunity in Virginia to lead the nation in the development of small modular reactors in nuclear in order to provide baseload power that's clean and reliable and affordable.
Just as with solar panels and wind turbines, the materials required for electric vehicle batteries come from, and you know the answer, China.
But I wonder if the events in your first year as governor, the more intense hurricanes, which scientists say they're more intense because of climate change, the war in Ukraine, and this week's OPEC decision making the insecurity of where we get our fuel from highlighted, doesn't that suggest that we should be leaning into more green energy, not less?
We tend to think of solar panels as clean, but the truth is that there is no plan to deal with solar panels at the end of their 20 or 25-year life. A lot of experts are actually very concerned that solar panels are just going to be shipped to poor countries in Africa or Asia with the rest of our electronic waste stream.
Well, to be clear, what I've called for is an all of the above. And in fact, it's not reducing an emphasis on renewables, wind and solar. It's correcting an error that was made in the previous administration's energy plan, which was to exclude everything else.
You can see that at a little bit higher cost, we got about half as much electricity from solar and wind than we did from nuclear.
And so we need to, yes, move forward with wind and solar. We need to move forward with carbon capture and natural gas.
All of the major problems with renewables aren't technical, they're natural.
We need to move forward with nuclear.
One of the big challenges, of course, is just the intermittency of solar and wind. They only generate electricity about 10 to 30% of the time during most of the year.
And one of the things that I believe is that we have a great opportunity in Virginia to lead the nation in the development of small modular reactors in nuclear in order to provide baseload power that's clean and reliable and affordable.
One of the big challenges, of course, is just the intermittency of solar and wind. They only generate electricity about 10 to 30% of the time during most of the year.
And this is why common sense has to come back into this equation.
There's been a natural experiment over the last 40 years, even more than that, in terms of the deployment of nuclear and the deployment of solar.
Which is we can't evacuate one of our strengths, which is the fact that we innovate in America. And we can, in fact, find a way that natural gas can continue to be a huge part of our overall power stack. We can innovate across nuclear.
Consider the case of France. France actually gets twice as much of its electricity from clean, zero-emission sources than does Germany. And yet, France pays almost half as much for its electricity. How can that be? Well, you might have already anticipated the answer. France gets most of its electricity from nuclear power, about 75% in total. And nuclear just ends up being a lot more reliable, generating power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for about 90% of the year.
And we can embrace renewables like wind and solar. But we're going to have to adopt all of them in order to get where we want to be, which is reliable, affordable, and a clean power stack.
Is nuclear power safe? And what do you do with the waste? Well, those are very reasonable questions. Turns out that there's been scientific studies on this going over 40 years. This is just the most recent study that was done by the prestigious British medical journal Lancet, finds that nuclear power is the safest. It's easy to understand why. According to the World Health Organization, about 7 million people die annually from air pollution, and nuclear plants don't emit that. As a result, the climate scientist James Hansen looked at it, and he calculated that nuclear power has already saved almost 2 million lives to date. All of the waste from the Swiss nuclear program fits into this room. Nuclear waste is actually the only waste from electricity production that's safely contained and internalized. Every other way of making electricity emits the waste into the natural environment, either as pollution or as material waste. There's just this problem with nuclear. While it's been pretty popular to move from dirtier to cleaner energy sources, from energy diffuse to energy dense sources, nuclear is just really unpopular for a bunch of historical reasons. as the facts have come in, that many of us have started to question our prior beliefs and change our minds. The good news is that I think that people still care about nature enough for these facts to matter.
As the New York Times reported last year, and we're quoting, production of raw materials like lithium, cobalt, and nickel that are essential to electronic vehicle technologies are often ruinous to land, water, wildlife, and people, end quote. And by the way, land, water, wildlife, and people are exactly the four things that the environmental lobby has no interest at all in. They don't care about the land, they don't care about the water, they don't care about the wildlife, and they don't care about the people.
The Netherlands is one of the first countries in recent memory to actually announce, as they did last week, that they're going to start to increase their reliance on nuclear power in recognition that there's just no way they could generate significant amounts of energy enough from solar and wind to meet their climate targets.
All you hear is you must do this because it's good for the environment. But that's a lie. It's measurably a lie. Electricity prices in Norway are set to reach about $1 per kilowatt hour. At these prices, it would cost $100 to fully charge one Tesla.
The more pain we are all experiencing from the high price of gas, the more benefit there is for those who can access electric vehicles.
Supplying the materials necessary for the battery of an electric car alone, just the battery, requires, and we're quoting, processing using fossil fuels, of course, of at least 50 tons of ores. Ooh, it takes a lot of energy to process ore. A single battery for an electric car needs at least, quote, 30 pounds of lithium, 60 pounds of cobalt, 130 pounds of nickel, 90 pounds of copper, 190 pounds of graphite, and roughly 500 pounds of steel, aluminum, magnesium, plastic, and other materials, end quote. All of which are derived from mining. Oh, where's that mining going to take place? Well, in third world countries with no environmental regulations whatsoever.
There's nothing wrong with getting your power from other places because actually, where they can do it most effectively is probably a better idea. And I think if you're going to converse with people, if you're actually going to have a reasonable conversation with them, I think it has to be about the facts.
Hold on, slow down. That's the party of science.
Yes.
We know that. They had a march for science after Trump got elected. You remember that?
Yes.
Because they believe in science and we don't. And we believe, obviously, in snake handling.
Look, I think that a lot of what passes for leftist liberal culture today is essentially economic privilege masquerading as morality.
So these are basically people you're saying who believe that Bill Nye is actually a science guy and not just a buffoon created by television.
Exactly.
A lot of what they say is just an effort to immediately take the moral high ground and, holding the moral high ground, do whatever they want to the country.
60% of the time, it works every time.
That doesn't make sense.
And we know this because their track record of incompetence is lengthy and unbroken. They are majestic in their ineptitude. So naturally, they want more power over power. There's just so much more to destroy.